The radio crackled at 3:47 hours, breaking the pre-dawn silence of Bagram Airfield. All stations, we have a broken arrow situation. Repeat, broken arrow. The words hung in the operations center like smoke from burning jet fuel. Major Kestrel Talon Voss paused mid-sip of her coffee, the ceramic mug frozen inches from her lips. Around her, conversations died. Keyboards stopped clicking. Even the perpetual hum of air conditioning seemed to hold its breath. Broken arrow meant a nuclear weapon was missing, stolen, or accidentally launched. In 23 years of military service, Voss had never heard those words outside of training scenarios. The duty officer's voice continued, mechanical and precise. Asset location. Grid reference 34S 417,943 3,812,842. Asset compromised. All available air assets to immediate standby. Voss set down her coffee with deliberate care. The coordinates placed the incident somewhere in the Hindu Kush Mountains, a landscape so unforgiving that seasoned pilots called it the meat grinder. She'd flown over those peaks countless times, watching her altimeter dance nervously as downdrafts tried to slam her A-10 into granite walls older than civilization. "Talon, you're up." Colonel Martinez appeared beside her chair, his weathered face grave. "Initial reports suggest the asset went down with a transport helicopter. Weather's going to hell, winds gusting to 80 knots, visibility near zero. But there's a SEAL team pinned down at the crash site, and they can't extract without close air support." She nodded, already mentally running through her pre-flight checklist. The A-10 Thunderbolt II wasn't elegant like the newer fighters, but it was built for impossible missions. Twin engines mounted high to avoid ground debris. Titanium bathtub around the cockpit. A gun that could slice through tank armor like paper. If you needed something destroyed in the worst possible weather, you called the Warthog. Weather briefing shows sustained winds at 60+ knots with severe mountain wave turbulence, Martinez continued. Flight safety says no-go for fixed-wing aircraft below Angels 20. Voss was already walking toward the door, her flight suit hanging perfectly pressed on its hook. "Sir, with respect, flight safety doesn't have SEALs bleeding out in the mountains." She pulled on her gear with practiced efficiency. "And they definitely don't have a nuclear weapon sitting in Taliban territory." 20 minutes later, she was strapping herself into the cockpit of Bone Crusher, her A-10's nose art depicting a skeletal hand gripping lightning. The aircraft had survived 3 deployments and accumulated over 4,000 combat hours. Like its pilot, it was scarred, reliable, and underestimated by those who didn't know better. The mission brief was simple in its impossibility. Locate the crashed helicopter, provide close air support for the SEAL extraction team, and ensure the nuclear asset didn't fall into enemy hands. Simple, except for the weather that had already grounded every other aircraft on base. The weather briefing hadn't lied. As Voss taxied toward the active runway, her aircraft shuddered against crosswinds that seemed determined to flip her upside down before she even left the ground. Ground control's voice crackled through her headset. "Bone Crusher, be advised current winds 270 at 65 knots, gusting to 85. Recommend abort takeoff." She toggled her radio switch. "Ground control, Bone Crusher. Negative on the abort. SEALs don't get to call in sick because of a little breeze." The takeoff was like riding a mechanical bull designed by a sadist. The A-10 lurched and bucked as she fed power to both engines, fighting to maintain directional control as crosswinds tried to weathercock her aircraft into the dirt. At rotation speed, she pulled back on the stick and felt the familiar sensation of leaving Earth's grip. The landing gear retracted with solid mechanical chunks, and she was airborne, climbing into a sky that looked like God's own washing machine. From her cockpit, Afghanistan spread below like a rumpled brown blanket, all sharp edges and deep shadows. The Hindu Kush Mountains rose ahead, their peaks hidden in roiling clouds that promised violence to any aircraft stupid enough to venture inside. Her GPS showed the crash site was 47 nautical miles northeast, tucked into a valley so narrow that satellite imagery called it the coffin. Military maps marked it as no-fly zone, extreme terrain. Local pilots had another name for it, where eagles go to die. The radio chatter from the downed SEAL team painted a picture of controlled desperation. Any station, this is Razor 6 actual. We have wounded and are taking effective fire from multiple positions. Immediate close air support requested. Break. Be advised, winds in the valley are beyond measurement. Our handheld anemometer maxed out at 80 knots and broke. Voss checked her fuel, weapons load, and survival gear. 2,000 rounds of 30 ammunition, 4 AGM-65 Maverick missiles, 8 Mark 82 500-pound bombs, and one pilot who'd never missed a target when American lives were on the line. She'd earned her call sign, Talon, during her first combat deployment, when she'd successfully prosecuted 17 close air support missions without a single friendly fire incident. Other pilots joked that she could thread a needle with a Hellfire missile. But as she approached the mountains, even Voss felt her confidence waver. The turbulence was unlike anything in her 23 years of flying. The A-10 didn't just shake, it convulsed like a living thing in pain. Her instruments danced wildly as updrafts and downdrafts played tug-of-war with her aircraft. She'd flown through Iraqi sandstorms, Afghan blizzards, and Libyan thunderstorms, but this was different. This was the atmosphere itself rejecting the presence of her aircraft. Razor 6 actual, Bone Crusher. I'm approximately 10 mics out. Can you mark your position? She kept her voice steady, professional, but her knuckles were white on the stick. Negative, Bone Crusher. Visibility 0. We're in a depression approximately 50 meters west of the main wreckage, taking fire from elevated positions to our east and south. Danger close, danger close. Danger close meant the enemy was within 600 meters of friendly forces. It meant she'd have to put ordnance precisely where it needed to go, or risk killing the very people she was sent to save. It meant flying low enough to see her targets in zero visibility, whether that was already trying to kill her. The valley mouth appeared ahead through breaks in the clouds, a jagged gash in the mountainside that looked like a wound in the earth itself. Voss descended, feeling the buck and roll as mountain waves grabbed her aircraft with invisible hands. Her altimeter unwound rapidly. 12,000 feet, 10,000, 8,000. The valley walls closed in on either side, dark granite faces streaked with snow and shadow. At 6,000 feet, she broke through the cloud deck and saw hell on earth. The crashed A-60 Black Hawk lay crumpled against a rocky slope, its rotor blades scattered like broken bones. Muzzle flashes sparked from multiple positions around the wreckage, Taliban fighters who'd arrived faster than anyone had expected. And somewhere in that chaos, a SEAL team was fighting for their lives while protecting a nuclear weapon from falling into the wrong hands. Razor 6, Bone Crusher, has visual on the crash site. I count at least 12 enemy positions, preparing for gun run. But as she lined up for her attack, a downdraft slammed into her aircraft with the force of a freight train. The A-10 plummeted 300 feet in 2 seconds, her engines compressing as they struggled to maintain power in the turbulent air. Warning lights flashed across her instrument panel. Her aircraft was being torn apart by forces that no pilot manual had ever described. The wind wasn't just meteorological phenomenon anymore. It had become her enemy, as deadly as any surface-to-air missile. And 30 feet below her aircraft, American soldiers were depending on her to do the impossible: land precision strikes in conditions that had already grounded every other pilot on base. The mission parameters were clear, but the execution was becoming a mathematical impossibility. That's when Kestrel Talon Voss made the decision that would define not just the mission, but her entire legacy. She wasn't going to fly a traditional close air support mission. She was going to land her A-10 in the valley and fight from the ground. It was either brilliant or suicidal, and in approximately 90 seconds she'd find out which. The valley floor rushed up toward her landing gear as she committed to the most dangerous decision of her military career. The SEALs had said the winds were impossible, but they'd never flown with Talon before. Her approach to the valley floor was less flying than controlled falling with attitude. The A-10's landing gear deployed with hydraulic groans that she felt through the stick, and Voss fought to keep her aircraft aligned with the narrow strip of relatively flat ground she'd identified between the crashed helicopter and the Taliban positions. Every pilot learns to land in crosswinds, but this wasn't crosswinds. This was atmospheric violence that seemed personal. The touchdown was brutal. Her main gear hit hard enough to compress the oleo struts to their limits, and immediately the wind tried to weathervane her aircraft sideways. She stood on the brakes and reverse thrust, feeling the A-10 skid and slide on loose scree as she fought to maintain directional control. Behind her, the twin engines screamed in protest as foreign object debris kicked up by her own prop wash threatened to flame them out. "Jesus Christ," came a voice over the radio. "Did that crazy bitch just land a fighter jet in a mountain valley?" Razor 6, Bone Crusher is down and functional, preparing to provide fire support from fixed position. Her voice remained steady despite the fact that her heart was hammering against her ribs like a caged bird. She just accomplished something that would either result in a Medal of Honor or a court-martial, depending on whether she survived the next hour. The SEAL team leader's response carried a mixture of disbelief and professional admiration. "Bone Crusher, I've been doing this for 15 years, and I've never seen anything like what you just pulled off. My boys are 200 meters northwest of your position, marked by infrared strobes." Voss began her post-landing checklist with hands that barely trembled. Engines, running but rough from debris ingestion. Hydraulics, green. Electrical, nominal. Weapons systems, hot and ready. The 13 GAU-8 cannon in her nose could engage targets as close as 50 meters from her position, and with her aircraft firmly planted on the ground, she had a stable firing platform that could deliver precision fire in weather conditions that would make flying impossible. Razor 6, I have visual on your IR strobes. Identify targets for engagement. Bone Crusher, we have heavy machine gun positions at your 2 o'clock and 10 o'clock, approximately 300 meters. RPG teams moving in from your 6 o'clock, 400 meters and closing. She traversed her cannon using the aircraft's ground handling mode, something that had never been used in combat before. The GAU-8's massive rotating barrels aligned toward the first target, a Taliban heavy weapons position that had been pouring fire down on the SEALs since before dawn. Through her targeting system, she could see the muzzle flashes clearly despite the wind and blowing snow. The first burst lasted 3 seconds and fired 90 rounds of 30-depleted uranium ammunition. The explosive shells walked across the rocky outcropping where the enemy position had been, and when the dust settled, the machine gun fire had stopped permanently. The sound of the GAU-8 in the confined valley was like God's own jackhammer, echoing off granite walls and rolling like thunder through the Hindu Kush. "Holy shit," came another voice on the radio. "She just turned that whole hillside into gravel." But even as she engaged the second target, Voss realized her situation was becoming untenable. Landing had solved the immediate problem of wind interference, but it had created a dozen new problems. Her aircraft was now stationary, making her an easy target for any RPG team that could get within range. She had limited ammunition for sustained ground combat, and most critically, she had no way to take off again in these wind conditions. She was trapped, along with the SEAL team and a nuclear weapon that absolutely could not fall into Taliban hands. The radio crackled with a transmission from Bagram. "Bone Crusher Control. You are ordered to abandon your aircraft and extract with the ground team immediately. Repeat, abandon aircraft and extract." Voss's response was immediate and non-negotiable. "Negative, Control. This bird's not leaving without the SEALs and the package." The package was military euphemism for the nuclear device, but everyone on the frequency understood what was really at stake. She engaged her third target, watching through thermal imaging as Taliban fighters scattered from her cannon fire like ants from a disturbed nest. But for every position she destroyed, two more seemed to appear. They were being reinforced faster than she could eliminate them, and her ammunition wouldn't last forever. Razor 6, what's your tactical situation? We've got 2 wounded, 1 critical. The package is secure, but we can't move it without a stretcher team and at least 6 healthy bodies. And Bone Crusher. There was a pause, filled with the sound of automatic weapons fire. These guys aren't your typical Taliban. They've got good equipment and better training. Somebody wanted that package bad enough to preposition assets. The implications hit Voss like a physical blow. This wasn't an opportunistic attack by local fighters. This was a planned operation, probably coordinated with inside intelligence about the nuclear weapons transport route, which meant more enemy forces were likely inbound, possibly including shoulder-fired surface-to-air missiles that could destroy any extraction aircraft before it got within 5 miles of their position. She checked her fuel gauges, 3,000 pounds remaining, enough for another hour of ground operations, but nowhere near enough to take off and fight her way out of the valley even if the wind conditions improved. Her weapons load was down to 60%, and she'd already expended half of her cannon ammunition. Control, Bone Crusher. I need immediate backup. Fast movers, rotary wing, anything you can get airborne. The response from Bagram was not what she wanted to hear. Bone Crusher. All aircraft are grounded due to weather conditions. Minimum safe ceiling for helicopter operations is 15,000 feet AGL. Your position is at 8,000 feet in a narrow valley. Extraction is not feasible at this time. Translation. She was on her own with a critical SEAL team, a nuclear weapon, and an enemy force that was growing stronger by the hour. The weather that had made her landing possible was now preventing any form of rescue or reinforcement. She'd bought the SEALs time with her unconventional tactics, but time was a finite resource, and theirs was running out. The next Taliban assault began at 6:23 hours, just as the sun was beginning to paint the eastern peaks with pale gold light. Through her thermal imaging system, Voss watched approximately 30 fighters moving in coordinated teams toward the crashed helicopter. They moved with military precision, using proper bounding overwatch techniques and maintaining communication discipline. These weren't farmers with AK-47s. These were trained soldiers, possibly foreign advisors or special operations forces. She began engaging targets at maximum range, walking her cannon fire across the valley floor in precise bursts that sent the enemy diving for cover. But return fire was immediate and accurate. Bullets sparked off her aircraft's armored hull, and she heard the distinctive crack of high-velocity rounds passing close to her cockpit. Razor 6, they're trying to flank us from the north. I need fire on the ridgeline, coordinates follow. Voss adjusted her aim and sent a 10-round burst into the rocky outcropping where SEAL Sniper was reporting movement. The 30 shells detonated against granite in flowers of orange flame, but the return fire never slackened. If anything, it was intensifying. Her aircraft shuddered as something larger than small arms fire impacted her port engine nacelle. RPG, probably, though the warhead hadn't detonated properly. Warning lights flickered on her engine display, but both turbofans continued to run. The A-10 had been designed to absorb tremendous battle damage and keep fighting, but even the Warthog had limits. Bone Crusher, you've got smoke coming from your left engine, reported one of the SEALs. She checked her engine parameters. Oil pressure dropping on the port engine, exhaust gas temperature climbing. She could probably nurse it for another 30 minutes, maybe less. After that, she'd be operating on single-engine power, which would make any future takeoff attempt even more challenging. The radio crackled with an encrypted transmission from Bagram. Bone Crusher, control. Interrogative. Can you secure the package for emergency destruction if extraction becomes impossible? The question hung in the air like cordite smoke. They were asking if she could blow up a nuclear weapon rather than let it fall into enemy hands. It was a reasonable contingency plan from a strategic perspective, but it meant accepting that none of them were going home. Control, Bone Crusher. Package is physically secure with friendly forces. Emergency destruction would require. She paused, calculating blast radius and fallout patterns in her head. Would require minimum safe distance of 10 kilometers. Current tactical situation makes relocation impossible. What she didn't say, but everyone understood, was that emergency destruction of a nuclear device in their current position would kill everyone in the valley, including her, the SEAL team, and probably half the Taliban force that was trying to capture the weapon. It was the ultimate last resort, a dead man's switch that guaranteed mutual destruction. The morning light was growing stronger, which meant the enemy could see her aircraft more clearly. It also meant that any Taliban reinforcements would have better visibility for coordinated attacks. She needed to end this engagement quickly, but her tactical options were dwindling with each passing minute. That's when she heard something that changed everything. The distinctive wop-wop-wop of rotary wing aircraft, coming from the south and flying low. All stations, this is Dustoff 77. We are inbound to your position for emergency medical evacuation. ETA 3 minutes. A medical helicopter was attempting to reach them, flying in weather conditions that had grounded every other aircraft on base. Either the crew was suicidal, or they had information about the wind conditions that she didn't. Dustoff 77 Bone Crusher. Be advised, landing zone is hot. Heavy ground fire from multiple positions. Recommend you abort approach. The helicopter pilot's response carried the calm professionalism that Voss recognized in herself. Bone Crusher, we've got wounded Americans down there. Abort is not in our vocabulary. Just keep their heads down until we can get in and out. She smiled grimly and selected her remaining Maverick missiles. If a helicopter crew was willing to risk everything for a combat rescue, the least she could do was clear them a path. The Dustoff helicopter appeared through the blowing snow like an apparition, flying so low that its rotor wash kicked up debris clouds behind it. The pilot was using the terrain to mask his approach, staying below the ridgeline where Taliban observers couldn't get a clean shot with RPGs or heavy machine guns. It was flying that required skill, courage, and more than a little insanity. Voss locked onto a Taliban position that had clear lines of sight to the proposed landing zone and fired her first Maverick. The missile streaked from her wing pylon with a trail of white smoke, guiding itself to the target with electronic precision. The explosion sent rocks and bodies tumbling down the mountainside, clearing the immediate threat to the helicopter's approach. Dustoff 77 Bone Crusher. LZ is clear for 30 seconds. Get in fast and get out faster. The medical helicopter flared hard and touched down beside the crashed Black Hawk, its crew chief already jumping out with a stretcher before the wheels had fully settled. The pilots kept the aircraft at full power, ready to lift off at the first sign of renewed enemy fire. Professional aircrew doing impossible things because American lives were at stake. But as the helicopter loaded casualties, Voss realized that her own situation had become critical. Her port engine was failing, her ammunition was nearly exhausted, and Taliban reinforcements were still arriving from multiple directions. The medical helicopter could evacuate the wounded SEALs, but it couldn't carry the nuclear weapon, the remaining healthy SEALs, or her. Razor 6, how many personnel for extraction? 4 ambulatory, 2 litter plus the package. But Bone Crusher, that bird can't carry all of us plus the package. Weight and power limitations. She understood immediately. The helicopter had enough lift capacity for either the people or the nuclear weapon, but not both. Someone would have to stay behind, and that someone would be her. The A-10 was too damaged to fly out, even if the weather conditions had been perfect. Dust off 7-7, load the wounded and get out of here. We'll handle the package. Roger, Bone Crusher. Be advised, weather window is closing fast. This may be the last extraction opportunity for the next 12 hours. 12 hours. With her damaged aircraft, limited ammunition, and a growing enemy force, she didn't have 12 minutes, let alone 12 hours. But the nuclear weapon could not fall into Taliban hands, regardless of the personal cost. As the medical helicopter lifted off with its precious cargo of wounded Americans, Voss began planning for what military professionals call last stand operations. She had enough cannon ammunition for maybe 10 minutes of sustained fire, one remaining Maverick missile, and an aircraft that would never fly again. Against her were at least 50 Taliban fighters with RPGs, heavy machine guns, and the tactical advantage of high ground positions. The mathematics of the situation were unforgiving, but Kestrel Talon Voss had never been good at accepting defeat. Somewhere in the wreckage of the Black Hawk was a nuclear weapon that represented either salvation or destruction for millions of people, depending on whose hands controlled it. And standing between that weapon and the wrong hands was one damaged A-10, 4 Navy SEALs, and a pilot who'd already accomplished the impossible once that morning. The wind still howled through the valley with supernatural fury, but it no longer seemed like her enemy. It had become her ally, preventing Taliban reinforcements from arriving by helicopter while giving her aircraft the stability of a fixed-gun platform. What had started as meteorological impossibility was now tactical advantage. She checked her watch. 6:47 hours. Dawn was breaking over the Hindu Kush, painting the valley walls with golden light that revealed the full scope of her tactical situation. And despite the mathematics of certain defeat, Kestrel Talon, Voss was exactly where she belonged. The counterattack began with mortar fire. The first rounds impacted 50 meters from her aircraft, sending up geysers of rock and frozen earth. Professional indirect fire, properly bracketed and adjusted. The Taliban had brought 82 mortars into the valley during the night, probably broken down into man-portable loads and reassembled at firing positions beyond the range of her cannon. Incoming! Incoming! The SEAL team's radio discipline remained perfect even as high-explosive rounds walked toward their position. Voss heard the distinctive whine of mortar shells overhead and instinctively ducked in her cockpit, despite the titanium armor that surrounded her. The next salvo landed closer, close enough that shrapnel pinged off her aircraft's skin like deadly hail. Her port engine coughed, ran rough for 30 seconds, then stabilized at reduced power. Engine fire warning lights flickered but didn't illuminate fully. She was running on borrowed time with machinery that was held together by engineering excellence and stubborn determination. Razor 6, I need coordinates on those mortar positions. Bone Crusher, we can't get eyes on. They're firing from behind the ridgeline, probably displacing after each fire mission. Professional setup. Mortars were her worst nightmare in this tactical situation. Indirect fire that could reach her aircraft from positions beyond the range of her weapons, fired by crews who understood proper gunnery techniques. Every round was getting closer as the enemy forward observers adjusted their aim points. She had two options: abandon her aircraft and fight from infantry positions with the SEALs, or use her remaining Maverick missile to try eliminating the forward observer who was directing the mortar fire. Neither option guaranteed success, but staying put guaranteed death. The next mortar salvo made the decision for her. 3 rounds impacted within 20 meters of her aircraft, close enough that blast overpressure cracked her canopy and filled the cockpit with acrid smoke. Warning lights cascaded across her instrument panel like a Christmas tree designed by a sadist. Razor 6, I'm abandoning the aircraft. Weapons and ammunition are still functional if you can man the gun. She began her emergency egress checklist, securing classified materials and preparing to evacuate her cockpit. But as she reached for the canopy release, movement on the northern ridgeline caught her attention. Through her targeting system, she could see three figures with a piece of equipment that looked suspiciously like a laser range finder, the forward observers who were directing mortar fire onto their position. One Maverick missile left, maximum range of 8 nautical miles. Target was approximately 4,000 meters away, well within engagement parameters. But if she missed, she'd have no indirect fire capability remaining, and the mortars would eventually zero in on both her aircraft and the SEAL positions. Razor 6, I have possible eyes on the FO team, engaging with final Maverick. She locked the missile seeker head onto the target area and squeezed the trigger. The AGM-65 dropped from her wing pylon, ignited its solid rocket motor, and streaked toward the ridgeline trailing white smoke. Through her thermal imaging system, she watched the missile guide itself toward the target with electronic precision. The explosion bloomed against the mountainside like an orange flower, sending rocks tumbling into the valley below. For 30 seconds, the mortar fire stopped completely. Then it resumed, but the rounds were falling randomly, no longer adjusted for maximum effect. Good kill, Bone Crusher. Mortar fire has shifted to harassment mode. But even as she celebrated the successful engagement, her port engine finally gave up its mechanical ghost. Warning lights illuminated in sequence. Oil pressure 0, exhaust gas temperature pegged, fire warning activated. She initiated the emergency engine shutdown checklist, pulling fuel cutoff handles and activating the fire suppression system. Black smoke poured from her port engine nacelle, and she could smell burning oil and hydraulic fluid even through her oxygen mask. The A-10 was designed to fly home on one engine, but she wasn't flying anymore. She was fighting from a fixed position with an aircraft that was slowly burning itself to death. Control, Bone Crusher. Port engine is down with catastrophic failure. Aircraft is no longer flight capable. Continuing ground support mission with remaining systems. The response from Bagram carried undertones of resignation. Roger, Bone Crusher. Be advised, extraction assets are not available due to weather conditions. You are authorized to use all necessary measures to prevent compromise of the package. All necessary measures. Military euphemism for blow everything up rather than let it fall into enemy hands, including herself, the SEAL team, and approximately half of eastern Afghanistan. She checked her remaining capabilities. Starboard engine running rough but functional, electrical systems nominal, cannon with approximately 200 rounds remaining. Her aircraft couldn't fly, but it could still fight. And somewhere in the wreckage of the Black Hawk, 4 Navy SEALs were protecting a nuclear weapon with their lives. The Taliban seemed to understand that time was on their side. Instead of mounting another direct assault, they settled into prepared positions and began systematic harassment fire. Single shots from sniper rifles, occasional RPG rounds, just enough pressure to prevent the Americans from reorganizing or attempting to move the nuclear device. Professional tactics. Contain the enemy, cut off their escape routes, and wait for them to run out of ammunition or make a desperate mistake. These weren't Taliban farmers. These were foreign advisors, possibly Russian or Chinese special operations forces, who understood exactly what they were fighting for. Razor 6, what's your assessment of enemy strength and capabilities? Bone Crusher, I'm seeing at least 60 personnel in reinforced positions. They've got night vision, thermal imaging, and communication discipline. Somebody trained these guys and trained them well. 60 enemy fighters with professional equipment and training, against 4 SEALs and 1 pilot with a crippled aircraft. The mathematics were becoming more impossible by the hour, but mathematics had never stopped Kestrel Talon Voss before. She activated her aircraft's emergency beacon, broadcasting GPS coordinates and a distress signal that would reach every American base within 500 miles. Not that anyone could reach her in current weather conditions, but it would provide intelligence for whoever eventually found her wreckage. The sun climbed higher over the Hindu Kush, burning off some of the morning clouds and giving her better visibility of the surrounding terrain. What she saw wasn't encouraging. Enemy positions on three sides, well-constructed fighting positions with interlocking fields of fire, and what appeared to be heavy weapons emplacements that could destroy any helicopter attempting an extraction. But she also saw something else. A narrow trail leading up the valley's western wall, barely wide enough for a single person but potentially offering an escape route for the SEAL team and their precious cargo. If they could reach that trail, they might be able to evade pursuit long enough for weather conditions to improve and extraction assets to reach them. Razor 6, I have eyes on a possible exfiltration route. You're 10 o'clock, elevation angle 15 degrees. Can you move the package up that terrain? Negative, Bone Crusher. Package weighs 400 pounds and requires specialized handling equipment. Plus, we've got one critical casualty who can't be moved without a stretcher team. 400 pounds. She hadn't known the nuclear device was that heavy, but it made sense. Weapons-grade fissile material required substantial shielding and triggering mechanisms. Even if the SEALs could somehow carry it, the ascent would take hours and leave them exposed to enemy fire for the entire climb. The radio crackled with another transmission from Bagram. All stations, all stations. Weather update shows wind conditions improving. Extraction assets preparing for launch in approximately 4 hours. 4 hours. Her starboard engine was showing signs of distress. Her ammunition was nearly exhausted, and the enemy was growing stronger with each passing hour. 4 hours might as well have been 4 years. That's when she made the decision that would define not just the mission, but everything that came after. If extraction wasn't possible and surrender wasn't acceptable, then she would create a third option. She would turn her crippled A-10 into the largest improvised explosive device in military history. The A-10 carried approximately 2,000 pounds of fuel in internal tanks, plus whatever ordnance remained unexpended. If she could rig the aircraft for controlled detonation, the explosion would be sufficient to destroy the nuclear weapon, eliminate the immediate enemy threat, and prevent the device from falling into Taliban hands. It would also kill her, along with anyone else within a 1,000-meter radius, but some missions required the ultimate sacrifice. She began reviewing her aircraft's technical manuals, looking for ways to weaponize her own aircraft against the enemy. The irony wasn't lost on her. She'd spent her entire career learning to keep airplanes in the air, and now she needed to figure out how to turn one into a bomb. The fuel system was the obvious choice. If she could rupture the internal tanks while simultaneously igniting the fuel, the resulting explosion would exceed anything in the Taliban's arsenal. The tricky part would be timing the detonation to maximize tactical effect while giving the SEAL team enough time to reach minimum safe distance. Razor 6, I need to discuss contingency plans with your team leader. Secure channel. The encrypted radio frequency was reserved for conversations that could compromise operational security if intercepted. This definitely qualified. Bone Crusher, Razor 6 actual, go ahead. 6. If extraction becomes impossible, I can prevent compromise of the package through aircraft self-destruction. Blast radius would be approximately 1,000 meters. You'd need to be outside that perimeter with the package secured. There was a long pause before the SEAL team leader responded. Bone Crusher, that's a hell of a thing to volunteer for. You sure about this? 6. I've been sure about a lot of things in my career. This is just one more. Her voice remained steady, but her hands were shaking slightly as she began calculating detonation sequences and blast effects. Roger, Bone Crusher. Will prepare for contingency extraction of personnel only. Package will be secured for emergency destruction. But even as they discussed the unthinkable, Voss found herself hopping for a miracle. Somewhere above the storm clouds, American aircraft were preparing for a rescue mission that would either save them all or recover their remains. Weather conditions were improving, reinforcements were organizing, and the nuclear weapon remained in friendly hands. All she had to do was hold the line for 4 more hours, with a crippled aircraft and an enemy force that outnumbered her team 15-1. In her 23 years of military service, she'd faced impossible odds before, but never with stakes quite this high. The next enemy probe came from the south, approximately 20 fighters moving in coordinated bounds toward the crashed helicopter. They moved with tactical precision, using natural cover and supporting each other with disciplined fire and maneuver. Professional infantry tactics executed by soldiers who understood their business. Voss engaged with her cannon, conserving ammunition with precise 3-round bursts that forced the enemy to seek cover. Each burst was carefully aimed, each trigger pull calculated to maximize tactical effect while preserving her dwindling ammunition supply. She was down to approximately 100 rounds, enough for maybe 5 minutes of sustained combat. The return fire was immediate and accurate. High-velocity rounds sparked off her aircraft's armor, and she could hear the metallic impacts even through her flight helmet. Her starboard engine coughed, ran rough for several seconds, then smoothed out. Warning lights flickered but didn't stay illuminated. Razor 6, they're trying to get close enough for RPG shots on my aircraft. I need you to interdict that southern approach. Roger Bone Crusher, engaging with small arms fire. The distinctive crack of M4 carbines joined the symphony of combat as the SEAL team engaged enemy infantry from their defensive positions around the crashed helicopter. Professional marksmen putting precision fire on targets that were trying to close within rocket-propelled grenade range of her aircraft. But for every Taliban fighter they stopped, 2 more seemed to take his place. They were being reinforced faster than the Americans could attrit them, and the tactical balance was shifting inexorably toward the enemy. Mathematics were becoming destiny. Her fuel gauges showed 2,000 pounds remaining, enough for another 2 hours of ground operations. Her ammunition counter displayed 96 rounds of 30, enough for maybe 90 seconds of sustained fire. Her star,